Hi, Dave. I'm
We
the Pinsoff.
are,
You're the
yes,
Petrozewski, and
yes.
this is what is it?
It's EP the pod,
Evolutionary Psychology, the podcast. Actual evolutionary psychology by.
actual evolutionary psychologists. Enjoy. David, today we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Hannes Rusch. I think he has a couple PhDs, actually. I think he's doing
This guy is
economics.
dripping with PhDs. Just a brilliant mind.
Yeah,
We get into
fantastic, fantastic scholar in Germany at one of the Max Plancks. And we get into exploitation and
oh
group
yeah,
identities.
really
And
beautiful insights into exploitation. I think it changed the way I
yes,
think about it. It made it so much more precise. Really great insights onto what exploitation is, how we can go about measuring it. What else do we get into?
where exploitation might be and whether or not people
Uh-huh.
are aware of it. We also get
Yep.
into heroism. We get into group identities, and man, yeah, it was just a lovely conversation about super important topics. And the thing I love about it the most is that Hannes is such a clear thinker, and he was talking about things that basically haven't been touched on that are super, super important, right?
Yeah, no, he takes seemingly airy abstract ideas like exploitation, tribalism, heroism, and he distills them into precision that is so crisp and mathematical and beautiful that it's a delight to
Oh yeah,
hold.
we
So
also talked about people being groupie, like in as an
yes,
individual difference, which is I think super cool. The idea of somebody's like groupie, like they like being part of a group or intergroup dominance. Yeah,
yes. Well, after listening to this episode, I think you will be a groupie for Evolutionary Psychology, the podcast.
nailed it.
Enjoy.
Today we have Hannes Rush. That is
Rush,
before.
right?
Yeah, can you say it, Hannes? Can you do it?
Rusch.
Yeah. So
Rush. I did it well.
you did it. You did it much better than me. Yeah. My son says I speak funny German. Today we have Dr. Hannes Rush, who is a both a tenured faculty. How do you say Maastricht University?
That was almost perfect, Maastricht.
Ah, sure. Okay, Maastricht. Okay, and then but you also are an independent group leader at Freiburg
Mhm.
in the Max Planck for Institute for the Study of Crime, Security, and Law, which is the overarching institute, correct?
No, so the Max Planck Society has lots of institutes, around 80 or so
Yeah.
worldwide. This is just one of them.
No, exactly. But that institute that you're at, the name of it is the Study of
Yes,
Crime. Ah, okay.
correct.
So
Yes,
yeah,
so
because we've had Annie Wertz on. We just had Brett Beheim, who is at the MPI EVA in Leipzig. And I feel like every time we have a Max Planck person on, we sort of need some explanation for people who are more a standard, more university system. And so the Max Planck you're at, there's a several permanent directors who are all somehow involved in the study of crime, security, and law. Is that right?
mhm.
Okay.
So we have three departments. Each department has a director, and the departments are one is for criminology. This is also where my group is attached.
Mm,
Then we have one department for public law and one department for criminal law.
mm. That sounds like a wonderful environment. I mean, maybe you can tell us about maybe as we have this conversation today about sort of what that's like working in a building with people who are united in that sort of sense. But you are an independent research group leader,
Mhm.
and the name of your group is the Behavioral Economics of Crime and Conflict. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, super interesting. And I've been looking at this, and there's two projects. One is basically exploitation.
Mhm.
Human, I love this. Man Unkind is the name of this project, and it's basically just sort of laying out. And then Hannes, I'll let you speak in a second. But it's just laying. I just love this so much. Like it's laying out this histories of humans exploiting one another to varying
Mhm.
degrees of organization, including up to like slavery or more mundane things.
Humanity's greatest hits.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. We are wonderful as a species. And then another is how do you say this other name? This disgrid is this or
It's
what?
grid.
Disgrid, yeah. But basically, there's so much that's driven by social identities. And so why do these levels, high level social identities, things like, ethnicity or race continue to exist and sort of what's pushing that around?
Mhm.
That's just so cool that you're studying both of those things. Yeah, so that's great. And let's start by where do you want to start, Hannes or David? Let's get into it.
Maybe let me just give you a spoiler in advance so that the name Man Unkind that you like so much is actually borrowed from a Metallica song.
Nice,
Oh,
great,
badass.
fantastic. Well, we will. If we had more editing time, we would cut to that song right now. But maybe we can put it in the show notes.
So
Fantastic.
why is man unkind?
Mm,
Other than that, it sounds cool in a Metallica song.
So I I listened so in preparation for talking to you today, I actually listened to the episode that you recorded just recently with Pat Barkley, and he's also very much into the evolution of cooperation, right?
Mhm.
And this is also where my interest in evolutionary psychology started of sorts, right? Maybe a bit earlier, but I did a lot of work on evolution of cooperation and was always fascinated by this. But then at some point, I was thinking, okay, this literature is very well developed, so can I really make any fundamental contributions there anymore? Probably not. Right, so what else is there? And then you suddenly turn to the not so nice features of human nature, right? So the dark sides of human behavior, as we usually call it in describing what the group does. And one of them is exploitation. I mean, I've been working on intergroup conflict also a lot. This is maybe, well, it's a very dark side. Um, but if you go to a little more subtle, a little milder forms of evil behavior, then you quite quickly arrive at slavery and all different types of exploitative institutions and behaviors that humans can develop and can show. And so I had a look into the literature, trying to figure out if there had been any systematic work on the evolution of exploitation, if you like, in humans. And I was astonished to find that there really is not much. And so I wrote a grant proposal and luckily got it funded. And so I'm now have the freedom to study this super interesting topic for 5 years on funding.
That's
Well, that's
fantastic.
fantastic. I'm very curious. So you're a game theorist, a mathematician. I'm curious what you think exploitation is, because it seems like a kind of fuzzy, abstract concept, and I'm sure you have a crisp,
Yes.
formal definition of it, and I'd love to hear what it is so that it can blow my
Hmm.
mind. So how are you thinking of this phenomenon?
So I think one this is just career strategically, it's nice that the term exploitation has been used by Marx and is actually quite central in Marx's philosophy of society, if you like. And so I think this has scared a lot of people away from looking into the underlying behavior, right? Because they didn't want to be associated with Marx. And I also, I mean, I read what he wrote about this and I find it interesting, but certainly not super correct. So I thought, well, why not give it like 150 years later or so to give it another try to understand what the underlying behaviors are and really start investigating those with the modern methods of behavioral science that we have. Um, and in that process, and also for the grant proposal, of course, I was always asked to define what exploitation is, like you just asked me to. But my standard response to this is actually, I don't want to define it so precisely because in my view, it's a range, it's a full spectrum of different types of behavior that you can see. Some
Hmm.
are very mild in the degree of exploitation that they include, and some are super exploitative, like slavery, like chattel slavery, even. So that is maybe the one of the worst forms. If you go into philosophy, for example, go into the Stanford Encyclopedia and have a look how they define exploitation. If you want like a formula, what you often get then is it's taking unfair advantage of someone else. But this is not a good definition because it just reduces the problem
Yeah.
to defining what fairness is.
Hmm.
And I mean, you have 2000 years of philosophy that are not able to come up with the one definition of what we're supposed to consider as fair. So you get into the same issues when you talk about exploitation. So what I'm trying to do is rather to have a look around and say, okay, we probably all agree that slavery is exploitative. So
Hmm.
what is it that people are doing there, and why are they doing it?
Mm.
So try to get rid of the analytical philosophy, if you like, of having
Right.
to very clearly define what everything
Mm.
means, but rather look
Hmm.
at behavior and understand the behavior.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, it's taking a clear example of something and then just unpacking it in terms of, and Hannes, you can tell me or tell us sort of what your approach has been, because it sounds like this is, how new is this or how far along are you into this project?
And the project, oh, good question. It's running for almost 3 years now.
Okay.
So we
All
have
right.
2 years left.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're kind of right in the middle of it. So how do you approach the study of that? So you mentioned how you, because it seems like a very large, overwhelming thing, especially if people haven't been studying it before. So can you tell us
Mhm.
a little bit about, you talked about how you approached the concept of it, but now how do you empirically investigate this, or what are you doing
Yeah.
with your students?
So maybe before I get to that, let me briefly advertise a book chapter that we recently wrote because I think it's never true that something has not been studied at all, right? So
Mm,
we're facing 2000 years of science essentially as the result or as the insights that we are working from. So we try to summarize everything that is out there on exploitation, especially in terms of theory on
mm.
exploitation, in a chapter that is called Exploitation Theory and Practice.
Oh,
Right?
that's
It's
great.
forthcoming in the Handbook of the Philosophical Foundations of Business Ethics,
Oh, okay.
also a long
Hmm.
title.
Maybe we
But it's
can,
also,
we'll put that in the show notes or even a link to it if, yeah,
yeah, it's also openly available from Crim Archive, I think, actually.
great.
Okay, so that is where interested readers can, or interested listeners can read up on the knowledge that is already out there. But what we are doing is the project is built on 3 pillars, and one is just do clear microeconomic theory or do the game theory of exploitative relations between people and also so one-on-one, one-on-n, n-on-n kind of relations. That is the theory pillar. Then we have the experimental pillar where we try to design behavioral experiments like the standard economic experiments that you know, that model situations in which one side can exploit the other. And then we see what people really do and how they perceive it, and maybe which type of people go which way.
Mm,
And then the third arm is the applied micro arm, as I call it, but you can also think of it as the archive data arm. So we are having a look around for essentially all available data sources out there that allow us to get an idea of historical forms of exploitation, but also contemporary forms of exploitation. And then we apply the methods of applied microeconomics, so causal inference statistics, trying to get at what has happened in these historical cases or several cases, if possible, of course.
mm.
So how are you? So you mentioned that you're mathematically formalizing this and you're studying it from the theoretical level. I'm curious, like how you are formalizing this. What is an example of like an exploitative situation where
Mhm,
person A exploits person B?
mhm. So what we had in mind when we started modeling, and at least one of the modeling approaches we took is really um, a slavery-like relationship. So assume you're the master, I'm the slave. Then what you want to do is you want to prevent me from running away, right? So you want me to stay with you. So what we give you as a means is you can reduce my chances. You can invest a little bit, so it costs you a little bit, but you can, by investing a little bit, reduce my chances of successfully leaving the interaction with you.
Hmm.
So you can, and we would
Mm,
consider this one behavior that creates a situation of dependency which the other party is not voluntarily entering, right? So you're
Hmm.
tying the person to you against their will. And then you can use this situation, for example, to well, a mild form of exploitation under these circumstances would be that you then lower the wage that you pay the person for their work. Right? The logic is simply, if you don't work for me, you have bad outside options, and I made your outside options bad, but yeah, sorry for that. That was rational from my perspective. I did that, so now you work for me at a lower wage or under worse conditions.
So exploitation, the way you're thinking of it, is when an actor pays a cost to constrain the outside options of the recipient in order that the actor can increase the benefits that they are reaping from the interaction and increasing the costs that the recipient incurs from the
Yes.
interaction.
Yes. So that's just one form how we operationalize it for one of the experiments or two of the design or paradigms that we are developing, but essentially that's it, yes.
Interesting. Is there another paradigm that you have?
Well, this one is we are working on developing the second one. This one is a bit too complicated to explain to people for online experiments, we realized. Right? So this is research. We try to make it as simple as possible, but still we are aiming to use this one for laboratory experiments and play it repeatedly with people so that they can really get a feeling for how this interaction structure works and can converge on the type of behavior that they really want to show, which might be difficult in a one-shot or strategy method type online experimental setting. And the other one that we're developing now is an even reduced version of this, where we make choices super easy to understand and the consequences super easy to understand and limit like the action space for both parties, but still try to maintain the exploitative aspect of what the principal, mainly we call him the principal, so the person in the stronger role, the master in the relationship, how they can.
Well, it's interesting. I'm seeing an interesting parallel to abusive relationships. So, if I'm in an abusive relationship with someone, one tactic I might use to get them to stay with me is I might insult them, lower their self-esteem, perhaps deceptively, to make them think that their outside options are more constrained than they actually are, that no one other than me would actually be with them. Or if they, talk to anyone else or even, mildly flirt with anyone else, I might, inflict extreme either physical or psychological costs on them. So I'm both deterring them from pursuing outside options and deceiving them into thinking that they have outside options so that they'll stay with me and that I will reap a greater benefit from the relationship. And that they will incur a higher cost from being in that relationship than they would otherwise incur if they had an accurate understanding of their outside options or if they actually had viable outside options. And that would be, I guess, moving a little bit further along the continuum from extreme to mild. And I'm trying to think of other situations. I mean, you could even think of just, bad mouthing your social competitors as something that's, on the mild, on the really mild end of the continuum, just spreading negative gossip about someone, say if you're competing with them for, a promotion or a job. That's a kind of way of reducing the outside options of other people. And it's doing it deceptively. It's not quite the same as, threatening violence to reduce the outside options, but it's a different way of reducing outside options via deception. Do you think that that kind of behavior belongs on the continuum?
Yes, definitely, yes.
Yeah.
So
in one
we
follow-up,
have
then. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Hannes.
we have a theory paper out also very recently, where we define, or for the model there, we use three components, which in that particular setting are the actions that the exploitative party or the exploiter can use. And that is luring someone into the interaction through deception. Right? So I can promise you love and happiness forever, but once you marry me, I'm gonna push you very hard, right? So that could be in that application could be one thing. Then that I confine you, so I make it hard for you to leave me, and I extract labor or any other benefits from you using force, so punishment.
Yeah.
And these three together, in that setting, they define what the exploiter can do. So it's the action space of the exploiter. And then we try to mathematically model and understand the conditions under which it's rational or optimal for the exploiter to use which means to which degree.
Hmm.
And that in economics, we then call that comparative statics. So that gives us some predictions for what rational exploiters would be doing under certain circumstances.
It occurs to me that an interesting aspect of your model is that the victim of the exploitation does not have to be aware of the fact that they're being exploited necessarily. All that needs to happen within them is that their space of outside options contracts, right?
Yeah.
And they don't need to be aware that it has been externally contracted by the exploiter. Um, if they believe the deception, then from their perspective, they could be making a rational choice. All that matters is the objective outside options in actual reality are contracted, and that the exploiter is reaping a benefit from that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh, and if yeah,
Oh, sorry, David, go ahead.
and it is often, I mean, presumably in many cases, it is cheaper for the exploiter to exploit via deception than via threats of violence.
Mm.
If they can pull it off, if there's a
Yeah.
plausible lie they can tell, because then they don't, they have to pay lower monitoring costs, they have to, incur, fewer risks from attacking someone. It's often in the exploiter's interest to achieve their goals through deception than through violence.
Yeah. So when you look into the data on human trafficking, for example, which is one of the data sources that we're trying to use, then you see that victims have been systematically surveyed on how they ended up in these kinds of relationships. And one of the means used by exploiters that is very often mentioned in like half of the cases, for example, it depends on the database and of course how you ask the question, but it is in 50% of the cases in one particular source of data on calls to a human trafficking hotline in the US, for example, 50% of the interviewed victims say they have been tricked into or deceived into this relationship with the exploiter in the beginning. And then the relationship started degrading, right? So then, and this is exactly, so the logic behind that from an economic perspective is just like you say, it's much cheaper for the exploiter to first try deception. If that
Mhm.
works, fine. If it doesn't, then you start using harsher means like violence or confinement.
And what is the minimal cost thing then? Can you follow that along? So that's trickery at the beginning. The relationship degrades. What is the path of least resistance, or what's the intelligence of the exploiter doing there? Right. So it's still cheaper. Like, can you talk? Yeah. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Oh, we haven't. So the model that we currently have actually abstracts away from this entire process.
Yeah.
So we're just saying we're just looking really at the outcome, and we're summarizing everything into a cost term for the three different types of behaviors that the exploiter can show. And then we say, okay, if deception is cheaper than using force, you're gonna see more
Right.
deception than force, etc. Right? So
Right.
for that model, we try to keep things very simple.
Yeah. You have
But
to start somewhere. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, give me money for a
Yeah.
second 5 years, and
No,
then
this
I
is
will run these
incredibly
experiments because
cool.
it's
It's incredibly cool. It's so great
Right.
that you're doing this. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool stuff. I mean, it occurs to me that another interesting parallel is in the economic sphere. You could think of a monopoly as exploitative. It's doing exactly the same
yes.
thing that, to a more limited degree, the same thing that the abusive partner is doing, the slaveholder is doing. What they're doing is they're constraining outside options so that you're forced to transact with the monopoly, and so that the monopoly can, charge higher prices and extract more benefit from the relationship. So
Yeah.
that have you thought about the economic side of this as well?
I mean, we've had a look around the economic literature. What you're referring to now is essentially using the theory of labor markets or different types of settings within not labor market, but markets in general, right? So if one side is reduced to one agent, like the monopolist, or a few agents, the oligopolist,
Mhm.
then you have similar structures. Um, And so the theory that has been developed there is informative for us. But what we're particularly interested in is also, so usually the market literature in economics assumes that there's an institutional framework in which agents act, and this is usually governed by law. And so the monopolists and the oligopolists are a little constrained in what they can do. And what we are doing is we're like crossing the boundary to criminology, if you like, or to law and economics by saying, what if the exploiters or the potential exploiters don't care about the law, right? If they just say, okay, if I violate the legal framework or if I go against the rules, I might have to pay an additional extra cost if I'm caught, but it might be worth it, right? So let's try it. And this is essentially what we're adding there as a contribution by saying, okay, let's just think of completely unconstrained agents on the strong side.
Yeah. I love how what you did is you took an example of an important phenomenon, abstracted it away. And what David's doing right now, and I'm doing too, and I think a lot of listeners are, is then turning around and saying, given how you've abstracted it, where else in life do we see this? And yeah, it's starting to feel like everything, just about, like government, policy, your jobs. We talked about jobs an episode or two ago, where there can be constraints in your options. The detection of exploitation, what would that mean from the perspective of the exploited? Like, is there a detection of exploitation when, for example, I realize that my options are being curtailed artificially, or like that's also seems like a tricky thing.
So we are working on this, right? We have ongoing projects that try to look into exactly this. But we started with a project which is close to be written up, where we simply surveyed people in the US, a representative sample, and asked them, have you ever been exploited in your professional career? Yes, no. And 70% of the people said yes. So then we asked them, okay, what exactly happened? Who was the person exploiting you, and what did the situation look like? And then we got qualitative responses from them, and we're still working on coding these in a systematic way. So you can think of it like it's an experience sampling kind of approach. But what we also asked them to do is, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but there's this situational interdependence scale and framework. So that's essentially the idea behind it is, let's try to come up with a framework that like captures all dimensions on which situations that we perceive can differ. Okay, so it's not my research, we're just using it, but I like the idea, right? So that you say, okay, people probably run around with a framework that helps them make sense of the situations that they are in particular in social interactions. And so then they came up with a couple of dimensions along which social interactions typically differ. And we used it and asked people, okay, in this situation, for example, how high was the degree of future interdependence between yourself and the other person? And several kinds of these questions. And so we used it to try to get an understanding of what the prototypical situations look like in which people feel exploited. And then we
Could you
asked them,
unpack what this notion of future interdependence? Well, what does that mean?
think of it as repeated play.
Okay.
Right, so if we play a one-shot dictator game, so if you're a random stranger on the subway in New York, I'm probably not going to see you again. But if you're David Pinzoff and you might end up my referee in some journal publication or so, there's a chance that our interaction that started today will somehow continue. And so our degree of future interdependence is a bit higher than for a random stranger in New York subway.
Right. And for like a boss, it would be very high. Like the person
Yes.
who's your boss every day, and you come into work next day and the next day and the next day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So
Exactly.
we have future. So how does that factor into exploitation?
So what we asked participants, so we have a set of situations where people said, okay, I was exploited in this situation, or I felt better, let's say I felt exploited in this situation. And then we asked them, okay, what would need to happen how would the situation need to change in order for you to not feel exploited anymore?
Mm.
So they described a situation where the factors that made them feel exploited are removed, and then we asked them to rate this new situation again on on this SIS on the scale.
Hmm.
And then we can compare essentially what do people think how the situation would need to change in order for them to not feel exploited anymore. And then we took their responses. So a couple of the dimensions actually showed up as significant there. But then we also wanted to get at causality, right? So what we have here is just how people think of those situations and what they think would need to change. But then we, in a third study of that paper, we turned this into a third-party observer kind of situation, and we described or we developed simple scenarios where we said, okay, here's a boss, here's an employee. The boss did this to the employee. Please rate the situation on using the scale and tell us how strongly you think that the boss exploited the employee. And the main thing actually that shows up there is that if people feel that the weak party is completely under the control of the strong party, that's the strongest predictor for feelings or feelings of own feelings of exploitation, but also of third-party observer ratings of, okay, this boss is clearly exploiting this employee.
Mm.
Right, so in the end, you can say it boils down, or at least the strongest predictor there objectively is asymmetry of power and the stronger party making use of this power to extract something from the weak party, which is perfectly in line with the Stanford Encyclopedia definition, right? So it's
Hmm.
maybe not the biggest, it's maybe not the biggest discovery, but it's nice to see that, okay, if you really systematically look into how people perceive this, then you get this result empirically back.
Yeah.
But your way of thinking of it is a little more nuanced than that, and that the power asymmetry in part derives from the exploitation itself, right? So if I'm a monopolist and you have no
Mm,
other options but to buy from me, then and maybe I've done that because I've any competitor to mine I've sabotaged in some way. Then I've created that power asymmetry. The
mhm.
exploitation itself has bought me that power asymmetry. Um, and and in addition, once I have that power asymmetry, I'm going to use it to further the exploitation, to further constrain your outside options, to sabotage any competitors that might arise.
Yes.
And so it's not merely that. So the power asymmetry is sort of baked into the model of exploitation itself, right?
In this particular, so again, in this
Yeah.
particular study, yes, but in general, no. So
Okay. Hmm.
we would, so we need to start somewhere with the vignettes, for example, that we are showing participants there. And there we don't tell them a story about how this boss became to be the boss and how the employee came to be the
Got it.
employee.
Hmm.
We just started with the power asymmetry. But in a more general approach or in a general modeling approach, for example, the one that we are taking in the theory project I talked about
Hmm.
earlier, there we would add an additional stage where the stronger party can really increase its strength before
Hmm.
making use of the dependent situation that it created also.
I see.
But technically, so I would completely agree with you that technically, oh, it's an interesting question. We haven't really systematically maybe looked into this yet. Is exploitation also possible between perfectly symmetrical partners?
Hmm.
And so maybe this is a limiting case where like the scope for exploitation vanishes. I don't know. It will also probably depend on how you model it, but
Well, I
it's
mean,
an
you could,
interesting
it
question.
seems like
Yeah.
you could get that with deception. Deception would be the only means available for equally powerful individuals to exploit each other. 'Cause I could just lie to you and say that your outside options don't exist. And if you believe me, then I get to exploit you now. Um, uh, but if there's no power asymmetry, then I can't, physically threaten you or threaten you with job loss or threaten you with some cost because that would itself be a power asymmetry. But if I can't threaten you in any way, then the only thing I really can do is lie to you.
Yeah. What do you think about the relationship between exploitation and cheating? Because that seems like a neighboring issue. That's an example. Because I'm also thinking of Lita's. We should have Lita on soon enough. But Lita's cheater detection work, because Hannes, what you were just describing reminded me some of that cheater detection work, it was an employee and employer, and it was showing that the bringing it back to the evolved software, there's detection of cheating, and it's really role dependent. So if you're from the
Mhm.
perspective of the employee, there's certain behaviors that the employer might do. So, for example, like you might have worked for a while, but did the employer actually give you the retirement benefits you're entitled to? But if you're coming from the employer's perspective, it's a very different set of behaviors. Like, did the employee like do what they needed to do, and are they getting paid too much? And um, so yeah. So one question is, what's the relationship between? Let me just start with, yeah. What's the relationship between cheating and exploitation? Is cheating an example of a equal relationship that involves exploitation? Or because like what's that deception? Is that, I mean, maybe it doesn't matter, maybe that's like a definitional question, but what's your take on cheating?
So when we think back to the theory project, cheating is definitely part of the picture, right? So deception can be one means to get people into a relationship with you, or maybe make them even work on promised conditions which turn out not to be true. But if you don't have any additional power asymmetry or means for the stronger side to limit the options of the weaker side, then you just have a market,
Mm,
like where a free market, where if I don't like the interaction with you, I could go to someone else and say, well, Dave lied to me, so I'm not going to go. Now I'm going to go to David and
I
see if
see.
he offers better conditions.
I see.
So there you would have different dynamics, right? Because
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
then yeah, and then one just quick follow-up then is related to that, and this is again based on the cheater detection work, is that from an evolved psychological perspective, there should be quote unquote biases in these systems, right? So if I'm in the role of exploiting somebody, all else equal, my evolved psychology should take advantage of that, but not frame it as exploitation, right? I'm just doing what's in my interest and what's my family's interest. But if on the conversely, I should be very ultra vigilant for being put in the perspective of being exploited. And so that sort of bias or error management idea of, and you were mentioning that you're, telling people a third party perspective, which might be more objective. Have you started to look into or thought about those biases?
yes. So that's ongoing work, but we also have one, or we have several projects actually trying to understand the justifications, maybe like overtly, but also maybe also just undercover, so to say, that exploiters might be using to explain to themselves and to others why they are taking unfair advantage of the weaker party. Right? So, and why it's justified that they do this. Um, you will, in normal circumstances, you will hardly ever get people to openly admit and say, well, yeah, I was the employer. This person was undereducated, so I gave them shitty conditions and they worked for me, so it's their own fault, right? But
Yeah.
this already is a justification strategy, right? So that you say, oh, I just made use of their low degree of education to have them work under conditions which smarter people wouldn't have accepted. So it's their fault.
Right.
But the
Mm.
moral question there is, so the moral question there is it really their fault? Is this behavior by the employer okay? Is it not? I mean,
mm,
it's also what you see. Economists might, it's difficult to, well, I mean, I shouldn't be generalizing to all economists anyway. But you have this discussion, for example, in the context of the gender pay gap, right? So some people might say, yeah, if one group is just not good enough at bargaining for higher wages, it's their own fault.
Mm.
Structurally, they might have the same power of leaving conditions they don't like and being in high demand if they're qualified on the labor market. If they
mm.
don't leverage the power they have, it's their own fault if we underpay them.
Mhm.
I just put this on the table, right? So we could discuss about this forever.
But
I
this is
guess
an
then,
this brings me to this is an interesting distinction because on the one hand, so if I have actively constrained my partner's outside options and I'm using and because of that that allows me to extract benefits from them,
Mhm.
then that's a clear case of exploitation. But what about in cases where I have not constrained the outside options at all,
Mhm.
the partner's outside options have already been constrained before I've even entered the picture. So let's say, there's a person that I'd like to hire and they have very few marketable skills. They can't really get a job anywhere else. Really, I'm the only person who would be willing to hire them. And because, I've correctly seen that their outside options are low and that they can't really work anywhere else, and whatever I give them, they'd be lucky to get. I give them a low salary. Would in that condition, would that count as exploitation, even though I have not constrained them?
You're asking me to like draw a clear line and say, okay, this is exploitative, this is not, but I won't do that, right?
Yeah.
Because
Hmm.
all I can tell you, it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And where you draw exactly the line, this depends on your ethical views, on your political background, maybe, on your own experiences, whatever, right? On what the legislative framework that you're exposed to is actually saying. So this is also not what we are really interested in the
Hmm.
project, where exactly this definitional boundary is, because it varies across countries, it varies across political ideologies, it varies across time. So
Hmm.
maybe an interesting project might be to explain at some point, but this has probably been done under different labels, would be to look at, okay, what pushes the definitional boundary more to this side and more to this side, right? So but this is
Yeah.
going
Right.
into debate about, okay, inequality, the emergence of inequality, and all these kinds of things. So political science, I would suspect, has probably, as I say, under different labels maybe, but done a lot of research on this. So I
Hmm.
think
Yeah.
there we cannot contribute much, maybe.
But I think that answer is the contribution, right? Like that it's a different perspective. So like, if I'm looking at a low wage worker, but I am the employer, I might not think I'm being exploitative because, like as David said, the constraints already exist. But then from an outside perspective, somebody who's really concerned about that person's welfare, they might just run the counterfactual of, well, if there were institutions that gave them outside options that I can easily imagine, then they wouldn't have to be in that difficult job. And so it's just that, again, it comes back to like this evolved psychology of bias, where depending on the perspective you take, it's exactly right, Hannes. There's no objective definition of exploitation, but it's that every individual has strategically sort of has a position towards, am I the locus of exploitation, or is exploitation even happening at all? So I do feel like you do have a lot to contribute in that. That's what you're basically bringing to the table.
Yeah.
I want to get into collective action for exploitation, or a group that works together to exploit another group. The
Mhm.
history books are littered with examples like this. Do you think it's possible for a group of humans to collectively exploit another group of humans while the exploitation being common knowledge, overt, and on the surface? We all know that we're just evil people who are exploiting these people, and that's the reason we're doing it. And let's go out and do it. Has that, do you see that as a plausible pathway for intergroup exploitation to emerge, or do we need some kind of moralistic or religious pretext?
Yeah, I also listened to you. I think it's the third episode where you discussed this
Hmm.
part,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
and I wanted actually to, like, if I get the chance, and now I have the chance, like object a little bit, because
Yeah.
my view is more that ideology follows the incentives. You don't need the ideology in the first, or as the starting point, but when the incentives are there for one group of people to exploit the others, to enslave them, to do whatever atrocities to them, they'll do it, and then they'll come up on the spot maybe, or with a little delay, with an ideology that justifies what they are doing to themselves.
Mm.
This
Hmm.
is more my view, right? I mean, this is a big philosophical debate.
Right. It's
If
more of a post hoc.
mind follows matter or the other way around. But I think
Interesting.
Marx has this saying, right? So
Yeah.
he would say mind follows matter, and would blame philosophers to see it the other way around.
Yeah. No, I certainly buy that the post hoc aspect of it exists, but I think maybe I can try to convince you that the pre hoc exists as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
No, I
uh,
completely agree. I mean,
yeah.
we've developed cultural systems and all these kinds of ideologies that are pretty useful in just on the spot, not just justifying once you've discovered a new opportunity for exploiting other people, but also even to see new opportunities for exploiting other people, right?
Mm.
So
Interesting.
I completely agree that's an interplay between ideology and incentive. So
I
that's
see.
going on.
So
I just
Hannes, oh yeah. So Hannes, just to clarify what you just said, it's the idea that some ideological communication, like by a leader, for example, what is actually being communicated, maybe not verbally, but everybody is coordinated around, is that I am communicating to you an opportunity to exploit people in a
mhm.
way that hasn't existed before. That's a really, is that what you're saying?
Well, the way I'm thinking about it is a little bit like we need coordination devices, and you also used this term earlier in the episode. We need coordination devices to figure out if a sufficient mass of people in our group is willing to like show the behavior that we might be coordinating on. So
Mm,
if the leader says, okay, there's outgroup X, they're all idiots, let's take
yeah.
advantage of that. This leader is essentially making a suggestion and checking if there's a sufficient degree of consensus within the group to go along and do it or
Mm,
not,
wow.
right?
Yeah.
And then this doesn't need to be, so don't think of this democratically, right? So, but I rather think of this, he might just need the three strongest people in the in-group to carry on. And then he just makes the suggestion. If he has a powerful coalition within his group, they're going to do it. If not, then they're just going to forget about it, right? So it's also
Mm.
cheap essentially to say, oh, yeah, it was just a suggestion. Let's not do it, right? Maybe not the best idea.
Yeah, it
But I
sounds
think,
like a high school or like school, like where kids will pick on kids and then they kind of like see do the other kids go along with it. And
yes,
then it's just sort of, it's these like exploitation feelers, right? Where it's sort of like just checking, is there common knowledge or coordination or willingness to go along? That's super, super
Right.
interesting, super important. Yeah. Well, so
Yeah.
much of
So just
human horribleness goes with that. Yeah.
if you're
What,
interested in this particular type of behavior, my co-author and friend Gönül Doğan, she has a super nice paper with Klaus Abing. I think it's called the mobbing game. What they
Mm,
do
oh, I'm
there is
familiar with this paper. Oh yeah,
mobbing.
that's
That's
that's,
great.
that's a
That's a
really good
great
one. Yeah.
verb for it. Mobbing. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm starting to work. So basically, the mobbing game is just a coordination game, and we all have to decide who pays the cost. Is that from what I remember, that's how the game works, and that's another version of the simple majority game, where we play a coordination game to see which subset of us is going to receive a benefit and which subset is going to incur a cost. And there's shockingly little work on this game. And
yeah.
I'm starting to work on a paper exploring some of the simplest dynamics of it. But I think there's so much insight to be gained in thinking about this.
Mm.
We
Um,
should invite you to our group hangout.
Yeah, that
oh
would
yeah,
be
If you
great.
want to,
Yeah.
if you want to
And
pitch the idea to the group,
that's
please
yeah, I'd love to.
that's
Yeah,
email.
that'd be great.
awesome. David, the cost would be like the person or both of you. So the cost would be like, so like just to make sure I'm being clear,
Mhm. Yeah,
if there's like a bunch of kids on a playground and there's one kid sort of the scapegoat, that's the cost. And so everyone else is sort of
yeah,
gaining status. Or I guess to give it teeth, it's sort of, I don't know, actually, what would the benefit be there? That they actually, there's a coordination that if I'm the victim, I might be willing to like give up a toy or resources, and it's becoming common knowledge, right? Like
hmm
to give it evolutionary teeth,
yeah,
it's that if you guys are dominant over me and you behave in such a way that it's common knowledge to all of us and third parties,
hmm
then it's sort of a recalibration that like you guys will get stuff from me more or less. Is that sort of,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Basically,
You
and
can
it
think
it
about it like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, what's interesting about it is because it's a coordination game. Focal points are needed to coordinate, and it explains sort of why the weird kid or the conspicuously different
Yeah,
kid is
yeah,
often the one
yeah.
who gets picked on. It's
No,
not necessarily that
totally.
they're
Yeah,
dumb
yeah.
or incompetent or mean or something like that. It's just that they're visibly different from everyone else, and
Yeah,
that
their
helps us
coordination
coordinate.
point. Yeah.
And so what your colleagues found in the mobbing game is that people rapidly converged on different ways of coordinating. And so they had one condition where there were like, some rich people and some conspicuously poor people. And what they found was that people didn't really care. Sometimes they'd gang up on the rich people, sometimes they'd gang up on the poor people.
Mm.
Well, it didn't really matter what the level of wealth was. It wasn't that we had like an animosity toward rich people or poor people. It was just they were conspicuously different, and that helped us coordinate,
Uh,
which I think is really interesting.
yeah.
Um,
Hannes, you were going to say something when I was
Yeah, I
asking the
just
question. Yeah.
wanted to add, because you were asking for what the material benefits of this type of mobbing behavior are. I think there's also a signaling aspect to this, that it might just be enough to gang up with two strong guys and push around a third weaker guy, just to signal to everyone else, if you mess with the two of us, that's what you're in for, right? So it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter essentially what they immediately get from it, but it's more
Mm.
the signaling deterrence
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
logic
Yeah.
that
Right.
might
Yeah.
be
Right.
playing a role.
And another kind of mind-bending benefit they might get is to themselves avoid being the targets of a gang of bullies.
Indeed,
So
yes.
this is an interesting way I've been modeling this is what I call the witch hunt game. So let's say we're all certain that one of us is a witch. That means at the start of the game, we each have a 1/3 probability of being found guilty of witchcraft. And so if Hannes and I form an alliance against Dave and accuse him of
Mm.
witchcraft, we've now increased our payoffs from -1/3 to zero. And so that increase to zero is itself our benefit.
Mm.
Right.
That's super cool. That also
Yeah.
suggests like sensitivity in the design to like a mobbing. Like, are we in a mobbing ecology? And if so,
Hmm.
that should really crank up conflict.
Yes.
Because if you're in a low mobbing situation where that doesn't happen often, it doesn't benefit you to gang up on people. Or if it does, it's sort of, there could be leveling coalitions. But if we're all implicitly in a mobbing ecology, right, where sort of like um, there's no benefit to sort of being seen by everybody as sort of magnanimous, then it just immediately becomes a thing. If I don't gang up on other people, then other people will gang up on me. And whatever cues there are in the environment that that's true should really ratchet up the ganging up or mobbing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, the more paranoid you are about being ganged up on, the more willing
Mm,
you should be to gang up on people.
exactly. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
better, that's a great way to
yeah,
put it. Yeah, super
yeah,
cool. Amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we've run the gamut. We've really delved into exploitation in a fascinating way that's going to have me thinking about it for many weeks. But we've gone from exploitation to intergroup exploitation. I guess that's a good segue into intergroup conflict in general. You have an interesting paper called "The Knowns and Unknowns of
Mhm.
Intergroup Conflict." What are some of those knowns and unknowns?
Ooh.
It's a great
Um,
title, by the way. The knowns and unknowns. I would like, I have to
this
read
this
it. It's
also
like,
borrowed from, I think, Don Rumsfeld or so. He
oh yes, of
Oh,
course.
right. The
There's the
known.
known,
Yeah.
there's the known unknowns and the unknown knowns. Like he had all four cells or something. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
um, so there I need to like explain the background a little bit. So the paper is
Mhm.
written from the more from the angle of economics than from the angle of psychology.
Okay.
And in economics, a very central model that is being used in order to try to understand why conflict might emerge is the so-called bargaining model. The idea there is, let's say that there is a big pie. We can fight about the pie or we can bargain about the pie. If we fight about the pie, we waste time, we waste energy, and essentially you can think of that reducing the pie size. So
Hmm.
fighting in itself is most of the time very inefficient. It's destroying
Hmm.
opportunity options, or it's destroying energy and destroying resources.
Hmm.
And in a perfect world, you should always be able to a priori or ex ante negotiate about a split of the pie that prevents this destruction and makes everybody better off than they would be under conflict. Okay, so
What, even
essentially,
if there's uncertainty about, which side is more formidable?
this is where the problems come in, right? So, but
Yeah.
let's start from the very
Okay.
simple setting where everybody knows how strong everybody is. The pie size is known, everything is known,
Hmm.
and also bargaining is perfectly transparent and so on, right? So ideal conditions. Then it is under these conditions, it's very frustrating to see why people end up in this irrational, inefficient type of behavior, which is fighting about the pie.
Hmm.
Okay, and then you have, so we're with the knowns now, right? So this is the model that economists often start from, political scientists also. And then they discovered lots of modifications that you can make to the simple story, which will then allow rational actors who really understand the complete logic of the situation still to end up in this trap of conflict.
Mm.
And one of them is exactly what you pointed to. One of them is, I might not know how strong you are, so I might not be willing, I might underestimate your strength. So I might not be willing in the bargaining process to give you a share which would actually be appropriate. You know this, so you know what kind of share you could essentially be acquiring if we fought. And so we won't reach an agreement in bargaining. So we have a bargaining failure, and this is going to cause us to fight. Right? So this is one thing that can happen. There's lots of different modifications to the setup that can explain why even rational people would end up, or rational actors groups would end up fighting. And so in the paper, I give a long or a little overview of mechanisms that have been studied theoretically and also empirically that might explain why bargaining can fail. And then I give a list essentially of questions which I think are worth thinking about more. One of them is how identity plays a role in here. And so this is mainly the view, this is actually like relating back to what we already discussed. This in this entire literature, the groups have mostly been taken as exogenous, as given, right? And their characteristics. And I know of no good model, for example. I know of one which is good, but it's not fully developed. So that there's good starting work at least. But where you have the situation where a leader would be saying, okay, let's define an outgroup, let's strategically define an outgroup and see if we can get a strong enough coalition to go into a fight with them, which is essentially worth it for us, right? So which under relatively neutral cost benefit calculations would be worth it. And what you have a typical setting or a simple result that would come out there is, for example, rich minorities are at high risk, right? Because they are rich, so it really pays to fight against them. And at the same time, they cannot really defend themselves because they are small.
Mm.
Mhm.
And so that's a simple situation where you would see this kind of emergence of conflict to like not exploit in this
I would
case.
add, this is something I've been working on as well, trying to model this, but I would one more layer to this in addition to wealth and small numbers is social alienation. Because if the reason why the small group is more wealthy is because they're more productive, then there are potential benefits from associating with them and cooperating with them, interacting with them. They might share some of those
Mm.
resources with you voluntarily.
Or
But if they're socially alienated such that you're never going to get a piece of those resources anyway, the only way you can is by ganging up on them, then in that case, that would be another ingredient that would instigate conflict.
mm. But I would go one step. I don't know what your idea of social alienation there is, but I would consider this maybe also as endogenous, right? So we could
Hmm.
alienate them because
Yeah.
we know that there's a lot to be gotten from them, and so this could also be part of the picture.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, but even there, there might be some cases where it would be cheaper just to buddy up with them and and form a collaborative partnership with them, where they their benefits would flow to you at least to some degree, and that might be cheaper
Yes,
than violently ganging up on them. But
but
if
if they
if there's
don't want to
no
share them, yeah.
yeah, but if they're but if that's difficult and the cheaper option of buddying up with them isn't available, then in that case you might favor the uh, darker option.
This
Yeah.
is very interesting because, like, one of the tropes of demagoguery is that there is a group that has stuff and they're bad actors. And that really sounds a lot like it's killing several birds with one stone because what it's doing is it's sort of articulating there's a numerical minority group that has stuff we want. So it's doing this like exploitation feeling out, but it's also sort of painting them as bad actors, which, if accepted by everybody, actually reduces their options, that numerical minority. So if I'm walking around telling Hannes that David is a terrible person and Hannes accepts this, it's not only that we're not only sort of like ganging up on David, but we're also sort of reducing his social options in the sense that we're agreeing on a signal that other people will be like, oh, he's a pariah. And to the degree we have power, just then even if people would prefer to cooperate with David, but they know that you and I, Hannes, are going to gang up on David or punish people who cooperate with him, then they're not going to. And so I feel like a lot of quote unquote scapegoating or demagoguery is just beautifully capturing this deep structure of exploitation.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay,
There's a
I
way
think you
that
can.
that coordination can feed on itself. If we've all agreed to coordinate against the outgroup, it's kind of hard to break out of that.
Mm,
And as soon as a particular coordination equilibrium gets established, that becomes the path of least resistance for everybody. And so it could just be that the coordination itself takes on a life of its own, and that could be another factor in intergroup conflict. And that it's always been this way, and so it continues to be this way because anyone who departs from this way is going to face costs.
Yes. And by doing this, you also create enemies, right? And
Hmm.
if you can't wipe them out entirely, so it's the logic of a genocide, maybe the
mm,
genocide idea can be thought through as being just what you need to do in order to really reduce the risk of retaliation by the group that you've attacked to zero.
mm,
If you really want to make sure that they don't get back to you, you just need to kill them all.
mm,
I don't think this has happened often historically, and it's interesting to study
Interesting.
why, right? But the logic is, of course, there. You're marking the enemy group, and if you leave too many of them alive, then you have an enemy sitting there, right? And they might get support
Ooh.
from other groups, and they might get back to you later. So,
Wow.
um,
Yeah, I never
this,
thought about
wow.
that, the
Yeah.
twisted logic behind genocide, that it really does matter to an evil rational agent to make sure that they're all gone.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
This
fascinating
is
point.
this last thing we started talking about of the dynamics of coordination is leading into this maybe second part of what you study, Hannes, which is group memberships and this Disgrid project. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about that and sort of because we've talked a lot about exploitation, which is fantastic. I mean, not that people are exploiting it, but it's fantastic that you're studying it. But can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with this? And it sounds like it's about identities, or yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, um, it's my very small contribution to as you could call it, the in-group out-group literature, right? Which is it's super huge in evolutionary psychology, but in psychology more generally also, and since the 2000s also in economics. Um, and what I wanted to do, or one of the main projects in the disk grid project, is actually trying to replicate and then to look into the possible temporal dynamics of preferences which have been recently discovered, you could say, or Rachel Cranton and Seth Sanders and colleagues, they've suggested that you might be able to classify people into different types,
Mm,
where a type defines how they react to group markers. And so
interesting.
this is this groupiness or groupie behavior they labeled it. I think for English native speakers, this name is always like feels funny. For Germans, it's perfectly fine to say somebody is groupie, but I like the label. The idea is, um, if I'm strongly not groupie, you can put me into sports teams and say, Hannes, you're now with the green team. Please fight for the green team. I would say, I don't care about the teams. You put me in another group context, which could be Germans against what have you, right? Then I would say, I don't care about nationalities. I'll just be
Yeah.
nice to people who I think deserve being that I should be nice to them, and be nasty towards others. So I don't care about group markers. And what they do, they have a clever experimental design, I think, to distinguish between these types of preferences. And then they see, okay, there seem to be some people who never react to any group markers, any group contexts. And then there are people, and so this is also a spectrum, right? So you have different degrees of how strongly you can react to group markers. And what I think what the cleverest and nicest aspect of this of the experimental design is, they put people into a minimal group context, like the Klee-Kandinsky thing, and they put the same people, so within participant design, put them into a natural group context, which in their paper is Republicans versus Democrats. But in my replication and like longitudinal extension of that paradigm, I couldn't use that because I ran the experiment in a European context. So what I'm using is actually it's a lab in the field experiment, and one group of participants is police cadets, and the other in their first year, and the other group is economics and business students in their first year. And so I can compare essentially how they develop over time. The idea was, of course, that it's also interesting to study people who, like the police cadets, who are exposed to a very strong group identity, right? So they study in uniform, they get sworn in, all these kinds of things. And gradually over time, I ran the Cranton experiment with them 3 times over the course of the first year, just to look into, okay, does this exposure to such a strong identity change anything? Does it maybe create more groupie people over time, if you like? And all these kinds of things are I can look into these in this kind of setting. The very interesting thing I found, and this is also the main message of the resulting paper, is actually, and please correct me and please point me to the papers if I'm overlooking something, but I did not see any papers yet where this would, like the minimal in-group favoritism in minimal group context would ever have been studied longitudinal within participants. So
Yeah.
this was
Incredible.
just
It's a
part,
huge literature. It's a huge omission.
yeah, and
Yeah.
this was really just part of my experimental design.
Amazing.
And so for the natural group relations there, I used essentially you are part of students at one university, and you are matched for the experiment with students at a foreign university, which was actually true because they were run in 2 different countries. And what I see for both group contexts is that in-group favoritism is super unstable within persons. So it's not like I'm favoring my in-group today. In 6 months from now, this is relatively almost not predictive of whether I will be doing it again, right, at the second measurement. And at the third measurement, even less so. So I have like a 0.0 something correlation between wave 1 in-group favoritism and wave 3 in-group
That's fascinating. So you're just to clarify, you're talking about so the minimal group paradigm is, I like Kandinsky paintings versus Klee paintings, and that is going to put me into the Klee group or the Kandinsky group, and it's totally arbitrary, and by virtue of being in the Klee group, I'm going to be nicer to the people in the Klee group than in the Kandinsky group. So what you're saying is, if you run that same minimal group paradigm where, first you put me in the Klee group and see how nice I am to the Klee people versus the Kandinsky people, and then a few months later, you run that study again and you put me into the Klee group versus the Kandinsky group. What you're saying is, if I'm really tribal about Klee the first time around, that is basically not going to predict how tribal I'm going to be toward Klee the next time around.
Precisely, yes.
Hmm.
So I have a question about that, which is, so there's some work, it's not at all longitudinal in this sense, but it's like Rebecca Biegler developmentally, where, and if people don't know about this, it's worth looking at, but this sort of like blue eyes, brown eyes experiment that was done by a school teacher. And it was a situation where you take a arbitrary identity, but then in the classroom, it actually gets used as a basis, like by the children, right? Like to sort of like let the experiment run. And so what Rebecca Biegler found was that to the extent that the arbitrary markers organize social interaction and access to desired things like, turns or resources, the kids would sort of go along with it. So that's not super longitudinal, but in a sense, that's sort of the closest thing. So that's amazing, Hannes, that you're doing that. One question then for you is the lack of a correlation, is that because there's no sense in which the arbitrary groups matter, such that, for example, like let's say in the classroom example, if the structure of the world actually tracks the arbitrariness. So like, let's just say like, we're the yellows and the blues, and we're all of a sudden in a classroom, and there's actually some social teeth to the yellows and blues, and it starts to be enforced. Would in that context, do you think individual differences start to be stable, or we don't know that?
We don't know. My best guess would be, so the group relations that I'm using, these group contexts are, like you say, pretty much meaningless.
Yeah. Except for the
And
police thing. I mean, I guess that's a sense in which it's not. I mean,
yeah,
it's not like as strong
but
as sort of like a very overarching, you know. Yeah. But sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
they at least they are not that relevant
Yeah.
to how people make these social decisions in these like dictator games and stuff. And it's also easy for you to realize, okay, they are telling me I'm matched with someone who is, I don't know, studying at another university, but why should I treat them any better or worse? Right? But if you use a group context, so I haven't done this, but there's at least some data out there which might be used to look into this. Yeah, and a friend of mine, Robert Böhm, also co-author, we've written lots of
Mm,
papers together. He
yeah, we
also
should
has
have.
a lab in the field where he does this around an election in Austria.
Mm,
Um, and I think when you use these kinds of group markers, which have a stable meaning outside the lab, and then repeat the games, then behavior within participants will be much more stable.
mm,
But I think it will not be like, well, this is pure speculation, right? I think, well, give me another
mhm.
grant and I will study this.
Yeah.
Um, the I would be super interested in understanding whether, okay, there's different types of people with different degrees of groupiness. If you put some of them into the stable intergroup like hostility kind of setting, they will pick it up and they will start discriminating and do so stably, while other people would still say no, right? So I don't care about your group context, leave me alone. Um, so yeah, so I would be really interested in like independently determining people's level of groupiness and then put them into this kind of stable
Mm,
political or what have you
yeah.
context and have them and look at their behavior there.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
yeah, it's all future future
Yeah.
work.
That's super cool. Yeah. I
Did
mean,
you so did you look longitudinally at the non-minimal groups as well? So like if people were, tribalist about their
Yeah.
university or their political party, they would also be tribal about it the next time around. And did you find the
Yes.
same
So
same
this is
result or different
actually
result?
this is very interesting because one of the main results of Cranton, or Cranton and Sanders and colleagues, I should say, is that they only have one day essentially, right? So they survey people on one day. And when you do this, then their behavior, their in-group favoritism in the minimal context is correlated to their in-group favoritism in the natural context.
So
mm.
they're
This
in a
is the
groupie
main
mood
insight,
that
right?
day.
This is also, and yeah, so I replicate
Yeah.
this pattern, right? So in my data, in every wave, there's a correlation between the contexts,
Hmm.
but it's different people doing the in-group favoritism on different days.
Mm.
Hmm.
So
It's
it's
a
like a
groupie mood.
validation. Yeah, it's like coalitional. Let me propose a
Okay,
term,
sorry.
coalitional. No, not even, but like
Are you in a
groupie,
coalitional mood
tribal,
today, Dave? How are you
coalitional.
feeling?
Yeah, no, exactly. No,
I
that's
would
really nice
I would
that
call it a
it validates it's sort of like a sanity check, like that the minimal group is sort of tapping the software setting that day of the coalitional system.
yeah. In the
Um,
paper, I think I say, are you in a groupie state today or are you in
yeah.
a non-groupie state today?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about the term coalitional? I mean, like Hannes or David, like, I mean, so groupie, tribal, like is it groupie better than coalitional? Like how coalitional is somebody or like how groupie is somebody? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Potato, potato. Yeah. I think we're talking about the same thing. We're just flapping our mouths differently.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree. There's a famous quote by a German mathematician who said, Tische, Stühle, Bierseidel. So it essentially means I don't mind if you call something a desk, a chair, or a glass of beer, as long as you define what you mean in the
Yeah.
context, we're good, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Um, Great. So that's is that so that's the identity, or you talked about types of people earlier in the episode, which I thought was really interesting in terms of like locating types. Is that what you were referring to, like the groupiness or coalitionality, or are you looking at other individual differences too?
So the main point of that paper is, of course, to replicate this classification of people into types, groupiness types,
Mm.
and then also look into, okay, so the assumption behind the design was, of course, or the ambition was to replicate and then to explain who would be groupie versus who would be less groupie. But actually, since it's within person, it's not stable, right?
Right.
So it's
Yeah, you can't.
this
Yeah,
part of the research question can't really be answered.
right. Yeah, you
So
can't
Interesting.
you
So,
can't correlate something that doesn't exist if there's
right,
not
that's
stable
interesting.
individual differences. Yeah.
So I never got the answer. So there was also no correlation between, say, university favoritism or political party favoritism from one month to the next. Was that the same result there?
within contexts, there is no correlation over time, right? So,
Wow.
or
Okay.
very low correlation. Over 1 year, there's zero correlation.
Wow.
Um,
Okay. So
so the, and
if
this,
I'm really tribal toward my political party, that's not going to predict how tribal I'm going to be a year from now.
well, I don't have political parties
Oh, okay, I
in my
see.
experiment, right?
But you have
I have,
universities?
I have universities and Clay Kandinsky.
Got it. Okay. So the
And
university is the same result.
university is the same result.
Interesting. Yeah.
My my suspicion would be if we rerun this with political parties, especially in a setting like the US,
Hmm.
political party would be stable.
Yeah. I'd bet that as well. Yeah.
But I would think there, this is not to be confused with like the person being groupie forever, but the
Yes.
Yes.
person just really having bought into for some reason into this intergroup relation and
Yeah.
Yeah.
trying to like enforce this intergroup relation between these two parties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really
S-
important because because I think like traditionally psychology has sort of operated at the level of behavior and just sort of sought to say like are individual differences stable? But I think an evolutionary approach or a more sophisticated approach is even when it is, like you said, Hannes, I think it's really important to highlight that it's the result of this software calculating costs and benefits and sort of what's sort of my role or my strategy now. And so you might even get somebody who is stable for a while, but then sort of sees an opening. It comes back to these like market dynamics of like, what are my outside options? And so you might have a very stable politician who's really, really dedicated to their party. And as David has sort of pointed out, ideology comes second, or even Hannes, as you said it. And so, but then when there's an opening for more status or resource competition comes up, then immediately could just turn on a dime. And there's no inconsistency from the perspective of the underlying software because it's really looking for social strategic options. I think that's a really important thing to highlight. That you just did nicely, and I just want to emphasize, Hannes. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
completely agree. Yes.
Could not agree more. I'm tempted to use that study as further ammunition in my argument against this idea that conservatives are more groupie than liberals. There's a lot of research in social psychology that suggests that
Mm,
conservatives have a groupie personality, and that's why they're more nationalistic or whatever. Jonathan Haidt says that they're higher on the in-group loyalty foundation or whatever. And I have a paper critiquing that idea among other ideas as being implausible, both theoretically and empirically. And I have a new piece of evidence in favor of that that argument that it's not even clear whether groupiness even exists as a coherent individual difference marker. Yeah,
Well, I think
at
so. The
least in the
existence,
minimal groups
yeah,
context. Yeah.
I wouldn't actually doubt the existence because I also applied Granton's and Sanders' method to classify people into these types, and I get a quite similar distribution of types.
mm.
Hmm.
But this is, and also even the distribution is stable across time, but it's not the same people in the different
Right.
countries at the different
It's
days.
so interesting. Yeah.
Right. So
Do you
Yeah.
have
um,
thoughts about, I mean, is it literally just like what is the group they're thinking about that day? Well, no, that can't be right because you're actually keeping the group identity constant. It's very
yeah.
puzzling that it's so malleable.
is it they're in a bad mood that day? Because I'm thinking of, I'm sure you're familiar with Michael Bang Peterson's work on Need for Chaos. And he finds basically that the people who want to watch the world burn, who literally agree with the statement, I want to watch the world burn on a survey, that these people are more likely to spread hostile rumors and politically dubious, what we might call fake news, to try to sow chaos and discord. And what's interesting is they'll spread fake news even if it's on the left or on the right. Like they don't really care. They just want to watch the world burn. They just want to spread stuff and start shit, basically.
Mhm.
And
Can I just say Need for
Yeah,
Chaos sounds like a Metallica song name or a
it
great
really did. We're
like
we're back
like
to
getting back to
Metallica.
Metallica. Yeah, exactly.
And he finds fascinatingly enough that these people tend to be pretty, low status loner people who you might expect to benefit from an overturning of the social order. There's that great quote from Game of Thrones, chaos is a ladder. Well, if you're at the bottom of the ladder, it might be in your interest to sow chaos because if the social order is an upheaval, that might be an opportunity for you to rise in status, or at least you have barely anything to lose, so you might as well try to roll the dice on how society is arranged. And so maybe it's just fluctuations and like personal. Maybe I got insulted that day and I'm feeling a little insecure about my social status, so I'm going to be extra groupie that day. But another day I got promotion, I got complimented, so I'm not going to be so groupie. I don't know. Is
Mm,
there any plausibility to that, or am I out of my mind?
This is essentially the discussion section of the paper, right? So we need
Yeah,
to study this. I have
yeah.
no good idea of when people enter the groupie state and when they don't.
Hmm.
yeah.
So this just needs to be studied empirically more.
Yeah, it might
Yeah.
also be like just coming back to exploitation too. Like some days I feel like I'm exploited by the group identities I am a member of, and some days I don't, and that just is sort of a fluctuation too, and that might have something to do with it. But yeah.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, also with these in-group, out-group settings, you can have, so the in-group is also heterogeneous, right? And if I had a bad experience with an in-group member on a
Yeah.
day, I might say, well, I really don't like being associated with the Germans that much anymore today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you might just like look for friends in different out-groups that day.
Yeah, that's super cool. So we've covered sort of exploitation and the start of talking about the identity stuff. Is there other work while we have you that you would like to sort of cover? Because you've done so many different things, and I love the throughput line of sort of being really careful, logical, and sort of having an economic approach married to an evolutionary psychological approach. I think it's just so cool. And the way you're approaching these difficult real world phenomena, distilling them down in a way that's captures something, but you can still be kind of quantitative about it. Are there other projects that you think might be worth mentioning? Or maybe also, I mean, people listening, if there's sort of an ad for sort of like joining projects that might still be ongoing or even in the future.
Um, but this is very much off topic, but of course I'm now uh, very interested also in everything crime, right? So
Mm.
why would somebody be inclined to break rules? Why would somebody be willing to take the risks of doing this and so on? So there's been a lot of work in the economics of crime, but also
Mm.
in the psychology literature and in criminology itself. Of course, there's lots of work being done. So that's a new interest I
Mm.
have, or relatively recent, but it still fits in well with me being interested in all sorts of dark
Yeah,
behaviors that
yeah,
humans can show.
yeah.
One thing that we haven't touched upon, and which is a little, I don't know if I should call it a hobby, it was a huge fascination that I always had and which I want to continue a little bit. Currently, I'm just not really actively working on it, is heroism and high stakes
Mm.
altruism. Because I think in this domain, there's more and more data is becoming available. And so the very informative, high quality applied micro kind of studies as I would call them, become more and more possible.
Mm.
And I think I still have this feeling that the theories about altruism that we have developed and the mainly the experimental games, the economic games that we have used to study those don't fully match. Right? So
Mm,
I'm not like 100% convinced that you can test a theory about inclusive fitness and how inclusive fitness would be increasing your chances to be an altruist using dictator games of $10, right? I've done those myself. I think they are a very good methodology. They are maybe among the best things that we have because we can control for everything. Very nice, but they still leave open this possibility that for high stakes, things might be somehow different.
right.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm still very interested in and also following the literature a little bit on work on heroism.
Yeah. That's super cool. And
Defined,
yeah, go ahead.
defined as really like high stakes altruistic behavior in natural contexts. And so
Mm,
you can define heroism again as a question, how do you define it? And you can come up with alternative uh, definitions which allow for everyone to act heroically in social situations. This is not what I mean. Essentially, what I mean is really you're the guy who runs into the burning building to rescue the kid, or you're the
Hmm.
soldier who like throws himself on the grenade to protect his comrades. These kinds of naturally occurring high stakes altruistic behaviors.
yeah.
Hmm.
And
It's interesting
all,
you
yeah.
call them high stakes. That
Mm.
evokes kind of a gambling context. I mean, are you formalizing this as like kind of a risky altruistic act where like the payoffs could be huge, but also the cost could be huge too, and you're just taking a huge gamble either way. Is that how you're thinking of it?
Yes. So
Okay,
I think the costs are the main aspect. Yeah, the costs are
got it.
super high.
Mm,
So
Hmm.
they reach a level where they really have an impact on your future life. They might
Hmm.
even kill you in the examples that I gave, right?
Yeah.
mm,
Can also be a little lower. So there's also research on what's it called? It's good, I think undirected organ donations or so. That essentially you say, well, I have a kidney and I'm going to donate it to whoever needs it, and I don't even want to know who this person is. This has
Hmm.
an impact on my life, right? So I increase my risks of becoming ill and everything. But it is a very altruistic act, which has really high or really severe consequences, or can have at least, it has a high risk of having severe consequences for you.
Hmm.
yeah.
I wonder
And
if
certainly
yeah.
higher than just $10 in a dictator game, right?
I wonder, I mean, it's interesting. I see kind of a weird, twisted parallel between that idea and Ed Hagen's work on suicidality, who we had on the podcast. So his idea there is that if you are in a conflict with other people and you have really low bargaining power, and you're being exploited. I mean, your work also fits in nicely with his work as well. Um, you need some way of credibly signaling that you're in need and you need the terms of the relationship to change. And you also need some way of bargaining to change your situation. And what he would argue is that a lot of depression and suicidality and self-harm, these are simultaneously bargaining strategies in the same way that, a union might go on strike to withhold benefits from the company to get a higher wage. So they're simultaneously bargaining strategies and also costly signals, and that they're signaling need in a way that is comes with a true cost. And in some cases, the cost is risking your life. And so he finds that, most suicide attempts are not successful. And so you're taking a small risk of death in order to potentially reap the benefit of a renegotiated relationship. And that it seems like a similar logic to your heroism, where you're taking a small risk of death to potentially receive some other benefit. Maybe it's to rescue someone, maybe it's to get status or something. But it seems like the logic is somewhat similar there. Would you buy that parallel?
I'm completely not an expert on
Yeah.
suicidality.
Hmm.
Um, from the mathematical angle, I mean, or just from the costly signaling perspective, I see the argument, yes.
Yeah.
But I will have to read up on his work on this to make up my mind in more detail. But it sounds plausible in the way you explain it, yes.
Well, we're happy to be a Yenta, a matchmaker for you and Ed to collaborate.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to say quickly is that it's important. Hannes, you were talking earlier about the games not matching up, and I just want to like connect the dots for listeners that one of the reasons why it's important for the games to correspond to the phenomenon is from an evolutionary perspective, the games sort of embody the selective logic, right? So it's the question of why would genes for quote unquote or designed for doing something in a particular situation be selected for. And it's the games that sort of distill that down into something that can actually be sort of a genetic, like this is favored over this. And as you're saying, if you don't model the costs and benefits correctly, so for example, as you said, Hannes, like, if saving somebody's life only benefits you $10, but it's David saying it's hugely beneficial, it might get you like, a whole better life, for example, then we're not going to be accurate about what would be selected for the psychology. So that's why it's important. It's not just sort of like a mundane, like bookkeeping thing. It's actually really important for what would be selected for. I also just want to say quickly, Anthony Lopez and I started doing a project. We still have to do it, and Anthony, we should have on about valor in sort
Hmm.
of combat situations. And one thing that sort of immediately struck me is there's also a difference between sort of bravery or valor and recklessness,
Hmm.
like in the cost benefit thing too. And I think that's an interesting question of sort of when is behavior, even from a third party perspective, seen as reckless versus like heroic
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Mm.
I read all the Medal of Honor citations for World War One, World War Two, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War for a study that I did back
Mm,
in the days. And I can tell you, so if you're interested in this difference, then
yeah.
read them, right? So
Okay.
I can also give you my data. I mean,
Yeah, I
I
would love
counted,
to just
Interesting.
or just have a
I,
chat about it. Yeah.
I recall reading one study where they looked at Medal of Honor recipients and they looked at the number of offspring they had, and they found that honor medal recipients ended up siring more offspring, which is kind of an interesting,
that's by
if
me actually, yeah.
yeah.
But
um, I remember I always thought of bravery. At some point, maybe I'll think about writing this up, but it seems like the stag hunt captures bravery really nicely, and that there are two. So in the stag hunt, we could either all work together to hunt stag, or we can all hunt hare individually.
mhm.
And so there's a potential for a larger collective benefit. We all get more food if we can work together to hunt stag, but we have this temptation to just do the low risk thing and just get hare by ourselves, and at least we'll have some food. But if I try to hunt stag and no one else joins me, then I get nothing. And so we are all better off if we coordinate on the stag equilibria. But the problem is that hare is also in equilibrium in that game.
Mm.
So it's an interesting coordination game. But what I think bravery is, or it might be, is the person who's the first person to stick their neck out to go for stag, right? Because they're
Mm.
providing basically a group service. They're helping us coordinate on the better equilibrium between
Mhm.
those two. And you could think of, an analogous situation, if we're in a totalitarian regime, it's a similar kind of stag hunt. We could all work together to overthrow the regime, or we could privately kowtow to the regime and, curry favor with them and gain our own private benefits. And what a brave person is they're a person who takes a stand against the regime and tries to shift the equilibrium toward the more group beneficial one. And the reason why we hold brave people to such high esteem is because they're doing a kind of public good. They're doing a service for the group to help us converge on the more group beneficial equilibrium.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's just at some point I had that idea
Yeah.
about that it might be cool to formalize bravery in those terms. Do you buy that, or is there something to that?
But so again, sounds at first, hearing it first, very plausible. But I've just anecdotally, I have some um, information for you on this one because I talked to a psychologist who was actually working for the Dutch military, I think, at that point, neuroscientist slash psychologist.
Hmm.
And he said, well, it's not very difficult to select people on fearlessness, right? So you could also say
Hmm.
bravery is something like showing
Mm.
that you are not afraid of anything. And he said, essentially, we could like recruit only fearless people into the military, but we don't do this
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
because being afraid
Yeah.
is very important in war,
Yeah.
Hmm.
right? So that you don't risk your life for the most like minuscule goal, right? Just to show
Right.
off.
Yeah.
Right.
But
That's
you really
reckless.
want
Yeah.
soldiers to be able to calculate risks and benefits and only go for it if the calculation is right and like
Yeah.
don't over perceive small benefits and all these kinds of things. So
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
recklessness, right? Like that's
Yeah.
actually, I mean, that was part of the analysis for Anthony and I was sort of that, or for me, like that recklessness. Yeah, you only have so much life. You're not a cat.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I have the
So for me,
intuition that a brave person is not someone who's fearless, but someone who is afraid but does it anyway, right? Does the brave thing despite their fear,
yeah,
you know?
But
maybe
I
yes,
think,
but
yeah, but I
Yeah.
think, David, that's really important because I
Yeah.
also think it's sort of there's also a perspective shift in bravery or in valor, which is that it's actually not about the person doing it, but it's actually a third party holding up a behavior of somebody did and say, do more of this.
Hmm.
Right. So
Yeah.
from the perspective, it's almost like rhetoric or propaganda, sort of
yeah,
like, look, let's hold up this behavior somebody did, do more of it. So if you're like a military and somebody sort of like did something brave, the person on the ground might have just been at the right place at the right time. Like I'm not saying like people aren't brave. There's incredible bravery in the world,
yeah.
but there's also situations where somebody's just like, well, I'm in this situation. What's the best thing to do? And they do it. And then the military sees the benefits of that, or they put themselves at risk and they're aware that other people weren't willing to do that. And they just sort of like prop this up as do more of this. So, David, it's exactly like this group coordination thing, but it's a more sort of cynical take on it, which is we have this entry of like, here, this person did something beneficial to the group that was self sacrificing. And whether or not they liked doing it, whether or not they want to tell other people to do it, we're going to tell other people to do it. And we're going to tell people it was great and we're going to reward it. Right. So it's like the
Hmm.
same, similar thing of like, if you do this too, we're going to reward it too. So it's like rhetoric for sacrificing for the group.
Hmm.
I can really only recommend systematically reading these Medal of Honor citations because you have the full spectrum of what has been awarded a
Mm,
medal for bravery there. And there are some cases where you would immediately say, okay, this is like the super brave. This is the typical scenario that you think of where somebody runs
in
like
Hollywood.
into enemy front lines just
Yeah.
to rescue the injured comrade and takes him back safe, or maybe even dies doing this.
Hmm.
But there are also other cases, this is from World War II, where I don't know the exact situation anymore, but the setup was essentially I'm an injured American soldier. I cannot move anymore. My squad, my group wants to retreat because the Germans are coming. I tell them, well, you leave me behind here. I'm gonna take this machine gun and like hold them back as long as I can.
Mm,
And then I remember almost literally the citation then read essentially, when they returned to recover his body the next morning, they found 100 dead Germans lying around his position. I
right.
was like, whoa, okay, yeah, so this guy really like went down fighting.
Yeah.
He got the medal posthumously for this, just like you would suggest, I think, for other people to see, here's how you're supposed to die if you die. Right. So
Yeah.
if you have to die, do it this way and don't just kill yourself or don't just give up. I
Yeah.
mean, he
Hmm.
could have easily just taken his own life, right? So he could have been super afraid there's a battalion of Germans coming and he just anticipates that he has to die. So he wants to do it in a humane way. No, but he just
Yeah.
took the machine gun and held them off as long as possible.
Yeah. Can I just
So,
say too, just as you bring that up, and Hannes, you and I kind of laughed about this, is that one thing I love about science and people and just groups that's worth saying is like, my son was born in Berlin. I'm an American. We're Germans and Americans here. If you rewinded the clock, decades ago, we would be in a very different relationship than we are now. We would have been fighting. And I think just one thing that's horrible about people is that we do that. But then also, what's wonderful about people is that we group boundaries change or relationships change. And I just love the fact that, Hannes, you and I reflected on like, our ancestors were on different sides, but we have a lovely relationship. And my son was born in Berlin, and I just love that group boundaries and relationships can change very, very strongly, relatively quickly. And that's like a nice lesson, um, you know, for example, German and American.
I do tend to see the picture a bit more complex even, and would be thinking, well, even if we had lived during those times, we might have been very constructively peer reviewing each other's
Yeah,
academic papers,
yeah,
while if you had
yeah,
pushed us onto the battlefield, essentially
yeah,
we would have shot at each other, right?
yeah, yeah. Who was it? It wasn't one of the ethologists. Conrad. It wasn't Conrad Lorenz. It was maybe it was. He wrote one of the excellent things in a Russian gulag, like with bird beaks. It was incredible things. So yeah, just interesting real life sort of consequences. But yeah, no, I that's an interesting point, Hannes. That's right. That even in that situation, we might have had a sort of a multi-faceted relationship with the groups. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, like returning a little bit to what we discussed about the stability of in-group favoritism, of course, this is overstretching this one particular empirical result that I have there, but I tend to be inspired by it to think, well, if one day the incentives force us to shoot at each other, that doesn't mean that it creates such a hatred and hostility between
Mm,
us that the next day we wouldn't be able to discuss academic stuff again, right?
right.
So,
Yeah, I
Hmm.
think that's a flip side. I think people have, especially people who haven't been through conflict, have this idea that it's sort of a monster, like it's monsters who do these things. And I think when you hear people talk, they're always shocked that somebody who is like, especially like in a genocide or a civil war, somebody who picked up a gun and shot at people, a decade or 2 decades later is just a normal person and might even be interacting with the people um, that they were trying to kill. And I
yeah,
think it's sort of an ambivalent thing because on the one hand, it's sort of like, well, anybody could do this, but it's exactly right, Hannes. On the flip side, though, is that it makes it so it's not inevitable, right?
yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. So I think in the paper at some point I write, it shows us that in-group favoritism is malleable for better or for worse. And so
really nicely put.
you can make people enemies, but you can also repair that again, hopefully.
Yeah. So I guess maybe a lesson is be very careful about the people who are telling you who your enemies are.
Yeah, that of course. This is just the evil leader holding up the coordination sign and saying, let's
Yeah,
just gang up on those people. Don't trust those people. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, bringing it full circle, I mean, that is itself a kind of exploitation, is the way we defined it, where the leader is trying to demonize all the outside options to their leadership, and in so doing is better able to exploit their followers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sleight of hand sometimes, right? Because there's also, as we talked about at the beginning too, it's also if you are being exploited, it's really not in the exploiter's interest to tell you that. And maybe that's even in their interest to sort of like scapegoat another group, right? So if I'm exploiting David, boy, it's in my interest to tell David that it's really Hannes who's doing this to you. And it comes back to this, it's cheaper to sort of fool somebody than like imprison them, right? Or like, or fight them.
Yep.
So if I can sort of deceive David about why he's being exploited or who's doing it, even if David has the time or energy or strength to fight, if I can convince him about the wrong villain, then I don't incur any of the cost. And so that should be
Yeah.
especially important design too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been lots of, false flag operations throughout history where a regime will stage an attack in order to galvanize opposition to a group, and
Mm,
it harkens back to exactly this logic. It's often even cheaper to stage an elaborate false flag than it is to actually coercively force someone to do your bidding. Even when the deception is very costly, it's still often cheaper.
mm.
Yeah.
Hannes, we always ask, is there anything that we should have asked you?
Um, I mean, you're the hosts, right? So
By definition, yeah, yeah, it's the. Um, I mean, can you talk a little bit about how did you come across evolutionary stuff?
lucky coincidence. So I had a very, very, very inspiring professor in philosophy,
Hmm.
and Gerhard Vollmer is his name. And he is well known in the German landscape, philosophy landscape, for bringing evolutionary ideas into epistemology. So he wrote a book called Evolutionary Epistemology. And he was someone who trained me right from the beginning of my studies, actually, to see every type of human behavior through evolutionary angles, and maybe a bit too much so, right? But this is where I got in contact first with that, and I just was like primed by it and never stopped thinking this way, with a little grain of salt, because the more I'm into economics now, so I switched fields around, I don't know, after my first PhD. And in economics, evolutionary thinking is relatively underdeveloped. It was a thing in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and there's some really good work still being done, and also from back in the days. But economists tend to think more in terms of social norms, for example. So rational behavior, of course, incentives and rational behavior, that's the baseline. But then also social norms and how people like came up with institutions that then govern how they should be doing things. And part of those are social norms. And I think this very interesting like domain where you think about, I still am completely buy the brain as a developed, how you always say it, like an evolved machine that helps you make sense of stuff and behave in the world. Completely buy this. But there's an additional layer of information that goes into this machine, which is norms, of course,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
And I think these norms can have, and the evolution or the development dynamics of institutions over time,
Yeah,
they can live a life of their own a little
yeah,
bit, not completely detached from the requirements of the machine, of the brain.
yeah,
Also, the incentives that you have when you have people interacting in economies or in countries. Um, but when you take the evolutionary perspective and overly do so, then you might like reduce the importance of norms and institutions a bit too much in
yeah,
my view now. So I got quite interested in this, like getting rid, or not getting rid, but just ignoring, abstracting away from the underlying evolved functionality of the brain
yeah,
a little bit, and then just seeing where you can get in terms of explanatory value just with norms and institutions.
right.
And um, this is also, I mean, this is also what I like doing now. But I haven't forgotten about evolutionary underpinnings of everything. So
Yeah, I think you've recapitulated sort of the cultural evolution and adaptationist sort of thing where it's so if we talk, it's sort of you can have a, as Christina Moya would put it, it's sort of not a strong commitment, but it's just sort of like a heuristic, right? Where it's you can simplify or even just ignore the psychology and just assume sort of people are rational, and then just ask the question of given rationality, what kinds of norms would stabilize given interest dynamics and
mm,
agent-based dynamics, right? And it's sort of beyond the level of what's called individual or methodological individualism, which is just jargon for just studying the individual person. But then at a certain point, rationality, if you unpack it, is a Q-based evolved system. And so the more you know about one, the more you can know about the other. So no, I think that's right, and I that's you've recapitulated, I think, a very deep and fundamental historical point. And to your credit, you're sort of articulating it even in your own work. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the way I see it is different levels of analysis. It's one thing to understand an individual human mind and how it's structured and how it works. It's quite another thing to put a bunch of human minds together and see how they interact over time. And in that case, you get a different level of analysis. You get the population level of analysis, which can often lead to wild, chaotic, random things emerging through the interaction of these different minds that are sensitive to different variables, yeah, and at times it can even take on a life of its own, which we might call cultural evolution, we might call institutional history or something like that. But yeah,
Yeah, I
couldn't
think
agree more.
it's also
Yeah.
gotten better. I mean, at least in the evolutionary behavioral sciences, I think our generations have gotten better. I mean, I think it was there were some necessary battles in the previous generations, but at least in the evolutionary behavioral sciences, I think most of us sort of understand that they're not in conflict. I
Yeah.
don't know how it is in economics still. Like, I don't know. I mean, I know there was a caricature of economics that's sort of, it's very rational, and like, there's like a little person in the head and you're not allowed to say there's evolved design. And I know, again, as you said before, you don't want to paint a whole community in one broad brush and say all economists think this way. And there's certainly, like you and other people, evolutionary economists or sophisticated economists who think about the psychology. But I think it's gotten better. But I don't know. What's your take, Hannes, in economics, or is that a false question because it's not a unitary field?
Yeah, of course, it would be overgeneralizing to say um, all economists think of people as purely rational or purely irrational or what have
Yeah,
you. But I think part of the part of the answer to why economists focus on different aspects is also because they're interested in different questions.
yeah,
It's just one of the main economic questions is how do we need to design institutions in order them to like enforce collective behavior that is efficient and optimal with respect to certain criteria that we can define ourselves, right? So we could also ask the question as an economic research question, how do we need to design a redistribution, an institution that redistributes wealth and resources in a society for everybody to accept that institution and consider it fair to some degree.
mm,
It's a
yeah,
question that you can work on using economic methodology.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. No,
you
go
need
ahead.
to,
Sorry.
mm,
in order to like really work on it, you probably need a good understanding of what fairness is, what people perceive as fair. And there again,
Yeah.
you enter the realm of psychology and all the
yeah,
evolutionary things become relevant again. But yeah, so I think it's not in do or die either or. It's
yeah,
really just if you want to design institutions that achieve a certain type of behavior, you can do that without thinking about the underlying thing. You can just try it out and see what works. Or you can do it in a more informed way and then try to understand what people really perceive as fair and so on. So
yeah, yeah.
Well
It
put.
sounds, yeah,
the,
that's right.
the the reason actually why I would say I like economics so much is that we have the formal language that allows us
Yes.
to model all these kinds of questions.
Mhm.
It's not that we're the better psychologists or that we're the better sociologists or so. It's just the methodology is a bit more sharp, I would
Mm,
say,
Yeah,
which
I would
can
agree.
be an advantage or a disadvantage. I could tell you about this because like putting everything into maths also doesn't solve all the problems. It just makes communication sharper and clearer.
Mhm.
Um, but I do like economics a lot because of this, because it's possible at least to do this.
Yeah, no, I'm a fan of the discipline as well, and wish there were more integration between economics and evolutionary psychology, and I also like the precision that formalizing things allows you to achieve. If you don't try, at least make the attempt to formalize your intuitions, then your communication is just going to be way less precise, and I think you're going to achieve fewer and deeper insights than if you really tried to think hard about how you're defining things in a way that you could translate it into a number or a parameter. Um,
It
so
also makes it, by the way, easier to see if something has been worked on before. So
yes,
mm,
if your research question and your modeling approach converges to something to like a formula or a model that's out there in the literature already, then you directly see, okay, I'm using different labels. So my Tische, Stühle, Bierseite, right? So I'm using different labels there, but the question seems to be the same. And then
yeah,
you can just more easily draw on the existing knowledge without having to reinvent everything.
yeah. Yeah, I think Dan Conway Beam has a talk about evolutionary approaches and formalization. Maybe we can have a group talk. I can be on the side of formalization, formalization, but I don't actually think that. But I do think there's like there's a it can be gamed like anything else, and I think there's
Yeah.
sort of like it's just like any other tool, you got to use it in the right way for the right purpose, and yeah. But yeah, I obviously I don't disagree with this part. Yeah. Well, Hannes, I think we're coming up on the end here, but I will say that you are just doing such incredibly important work, and I just love how thorough and logical it is. And I just, to your credit, I mean, even just this conversation, it's got me thinking so much about. Every time I talk to you, I'm just excited about science. And I think studying a really important real world thing with that level of formalization, I think is really hard. And I think you have a real knack for combining those two in a way that I think most of us really struggle with. So thank you for doing that. You're very special and talented at doing that.
Thank you so much for A, having me, and for B, running the podcast, because I think it's really a valuable contribution to the evolutionary psychology community, and also like I think it fills a gap that I was always like aware of, but never really found a good way to fill. So I was always thinking it would be nice to have a format which is called fireplace conversations with interesting researcher A or B or C, right? And this is exactly
Yeah,
what you're doing, so I like it a lot.
yeah. We have to work on the fireplace.
Yeah, maybe we should get some fake fireplace backgrounds behind us.
some
Huh?
some, some soundtrack. um yeah, but no, but Hannes, yeah, no, thank you so much, and thank you for being interesting. I mean, that's the hardest part. The fire is easy, the interesting researcher D or H in this case. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much again, Hannes. And again, I would just want to plug for if you're looking at for interesting um, context to work in, I really want to stress the Max Planck Institute. And Hannes, I think if there's any justice in the world, maybe you'll get a permanent directorship someday. So if
That's
the
great.
MPG is listening, please consider Hannes for one.
Thank you so much, David. I mean,
And a Medal of Honor too while we're at
no,
it.
no.
Uh,
Maybe
All
just to
right.
advertise for the society. I mean,
Yeah.
the society currently has a call out for group leader positions. So if you think this could be something for you, go to the website, Max Planck Society, and check it out, apply.
Yeah, it's an incredible institution in the broad sense of the word, and also specifically, and there's lots of different MPIs, lots of different places, and it's
Yeah.
a lovely place where research and deep thinking and novel thinking that pushes boundaries is valued for real, which is lovely. So and rare. So thank you, Hannes, for being on. Thank you for doing the work you're doing, and thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
David, if you enjoyed this episode, well, first, David, did you enjoy this episode?
I had a great time. I learned a lot.
I love this. I had, this is, I'm happier after being part of this episode. So,
Yeah.
and if you feel that way, then please keep listening. Please leave a positive review. And, honestly, just spread the word so that more and more people are listening. And if you want to, also, we have a Patreon and send us or, a more wealthy friend of yours than you are our way.
Yeah, yeah. Do all of those things. Leave us a kind review. And since this episode was about exploitation, I will say that all those other podcasts really suck. We're the only one that you should
Mm,
listen to.
yeah. uh, see you all next week.
See ya.